What's going on, guys? So it's Derek here from No BS Auto Rehab. So today we've got another how-to. Today I've got my sister's 2005 Mazda 3, but basically all her motor mounts are bad. We've been checking this thing. Whenever she's driving it, she's getting a little bit of vibration going down the road, and we checked it out, and whenever she puts it in gear, you can see the motor just flop back and forth as she's driving. So what we're gonna do is go through and replace both motor mounts and the transmission mount underneath. I'm going to go through, show you all the parts that you need to take off in order to change all these mounts. It'll help with the clunkiness, like coming to a stop and then getting off of the brakes and back onto the gas where you feel a clunk, or going from like park to reverse and into drive. All those times that the motor is really going back and forth and clunking. So with that, I'll get into the video. We'll get these motor mounts changed out. So the mount we're going to start with here is the passenger front motor mount. So the only thing you have to remove to get to that mount is your overflow for your radiator. Now there are two clips on it. One right there that you see me messing with behind the washer fluid. The second one is in the back right there, right behind the cap. Basically, it's just a little metal tab that runs up through the plastic, and you just have to stick the screwdriver in there, spread the plastic apart, and you'll be able to get that thing up and out of the way. Just try not to pry on it too hard, that way you don't break the clips and have that thing rattling around. Alright, so you can see right here, whenever you get up under the vehicle, go ahead and get a piece of scrap wood or something to put on your jack. That way you don't have to worry about the jack poking a hole or denting your oil pan there. But basically all you want to do is just jack it up just enough to where that wood is touching the motor. We're not trying to lift the car up off the ground or anything, but just enough that it's going to support the motor when we take that mount loose, so you don't have to worry about it dropping down. So once you have that there, you're good to start taking the mount off. So now we'll start the actual disassembly process of getting that mount out of the vehicle. So all it is the two nuts right here on the top of the motor, and then there are two bolts down on the frame that actually hold the mount in place. So there is going to be a little tension on the mount just because of the way the motor's sitting in the car, and once you start taking nuts and bolts apart, it will move a little bit, but here's how you get rid of that. So just like that, with a few taps, you can break that thing a little bit loose. The motor might drop a little bit, but just take your jack, raise the car back up a little bit, and then you can wiggle that mount right out of there. So going back together with it is pretty simple. All you need to do is line up those top two studs. What I did is jack the motor up a little bit more to get it to drop down. And once you get it dropped down, you can put those nuts on and get all the bolts started. So with all of these mounts, it is really important just to make sure you get everything started before you tighten anything down, because that motor is going to put a lot of stress on the bolts, especially if you get them in a little bit crooked. It's going to be really easy to strip the threads out, and you'll have a long day if you have to go retapping any of the holes in the frame anywhere around the vehicle. So what you'll see me do here is just go ahead and finish everything up. Once you get those bolts in for the frame, I just jack up the motor a little bit more again, and that way it helps push the studs from the motor back up through the holes where you can get those nuts started, and then go ahead and get everything tightened back up. So this mount is the easiest one to get to. It's the simplest one to do. You don't really have to move the motor a whole lot. Just a little movement with your hand back and forth will get that motor in place. So you'll see me here go ahead and hit everything, get it tight with the electric impact, and then of course, like everything I do, I'll go back behind it with my manual ratchet just to make sure that I know that the bolts are tight. Once you get done with that, all you got to do is snap that overflow tank right back in place, and you'll have the passenger front motor mount done. So again, that is the easiest one. The next one I'm not going to be able to film because it's under the car, but I will be able to show you what it looks like whenever you change it out. So make sure you get the car on jack stands to be safe while you're underneath it. Alright, so I'm laid up under the car right now. So this is your transmission mount. And if you look under the vehicle, so here's the motor oil pan, there's the transmission oil pan. This is right beside the right side half shaft going across. So this is just a brace where the actual mount itself bolts to. And then the rubber piece is up under the subframe right here. So if you look right here, there's a piece of rubber right here that dampens the vibration from this bolt. And then there's a big donut looking piece of rubber right here that dampens the vibration going into the frame. And if you get really close right there, you can see that rubber is completely deteriorated and starting to crack. So basically, whenever this thing goes from reverse to drive, this whole shaft is actually bouncing back and forth within this mount, and that's what's causing a huge clunking noise. So we'll go ahead and get this one swapped out. It should just be this bolt and this bolt. You slide the mount out and then put the new one in, and that should be it. Okay, so right here you can see I've got the jack placed right on the transmission over there behind the mount. So the same way, once we take these bolts loose, it's going to support the motor and keep it from falling out of the vehicle. But we've got that there. My sister's outside helping, so I'll have her move the jack up and down. I probably won't be able to film actually taking the bolts out because I don't have a tripod this short, but I'm gonna go ahead and take those 2 bolts out and slide the mount out, and I'll show you what it looks like once I get it out from under the car. All right, so I do want to go over one thing while you're under the car to help you get all these bolts started. So if you're underneath it, if it's on jack stands like I am here, the motor is actually going to fall, like it's gonna rock back towards the back of the vehicle, and that's gonna make all those bolt holes harder to line up. The best way to get the motor to go back forward is to take a long pry bar like this, put it up here in front of the axle and against your drain pan right there. Take that pry bar and push forward a little bit like that, and you can see the motor moving. So what that's going to do is push the motor up just far enough that it's going to allow you to get all those bolts started before you start tightening them down. And it's super important to make sure that you get every single one of these bolts started before you tighten anything down, because if you go stripping any of these holes or the hole up in the frame, it's going to be extremely difficult to try to retap those and get the bolt back in. So just make sure you get all the bolts started before you go cranking anything down. And again, I will put links in the description for this, all the other tools that I've been using in the video, so if you don't have any of this, you'll be able to find it easy. So this last mount is definitely the most involved. You have to go ahead and take the whole battery tray out of the vehicle in order to get to it. And it's not nearly as simple as just moving that overflow tank out of the way. So you'll have to take a few of these little plastic pins off, take the whole front intake off in order to get to it. Now this car does have an aftermarket air filter, so I'm not sure exactly what it would look like to take the stock one apart. Hopefully it's not too difficult, but at least just that top part came right off on this vehicle. So the next thing you'll do is just go ahead and start disconnecting your battery. You'll have to take your battery out in order to get the tray out for it. Once you get all that out, you'll be able to see the mount underneath the vehicle. So once you have removed the battery, this front little clip just pops right off of the battery box. Then you can unhook all your wires, get them moved out of the way in order for you to take the battery box off. So there's just 3 little bolts down inside of the box that actually hold it together. And I originally thought that you would have to undo the ECU harness in order to move that box out of the way. But you'll see here in the next couple of clips that you can just take that box and flip it up out of the way in order to get to the mount. So you really don't have to take a whole lot of like intricate stuff apart, but it is just a little bit tedious getting all this little stuff out of the way in order to get to the mount. But once you get this box out of the way, you'll be able to see the mount and be able to understand what you need to do to take it out. But at this point, you are almost done with swapping this mount out. So one thing I noticed on this mount is the bolts are a lot tighter. So I tried to get these loose with my smaller 3/8 impact, and I could not budge them. I also tried to do it with the breaker bar, and I still couldn't break those things loose. So I had to pull out my 1/2" Milwaukee to break them loose. And then I switched back to the 3/8 just because it's easier to hold on to and get down in there to work with the bolts and get everything loose. So there is like a tray on top of the actual mount itself. So that tray is just where the battery box actually mounts to. So you'll see me move it out of the way. It's still got some wires connected to it, but then the actual motor mount is right there. It just pulls right back out. So putting the mount back together, this one is definitely the hardest mount to do because it is the biggest and it supports the motor the most. So when you take it off, the motor does rock back and forth quite a bit. But what I'll tell you, the easiest way to do it is try to get that center bolt lined up with the motor first and then move the motor in place. And you'll kind of see what I'm talking about when you work on your own car, because it drops around the frame of the vehicle. And if you try to put that on first, it's way harder to get the motor lined up and get that long stud lined with the motor so you don't strip it out. The main thing is just try your best not to strip anything out. Just make sure you get all the bolts started before you tighten anything down. That's the biggest thing I can tell you about doing this job. But it will probably take an extra set of hands to get that motor back in place. I know I had my sister helping get the bolt lined up as I was pushing the motor. So this is one mount that you might just want to make sure there's somebody else around you that can help if you need a hand to get that motor back in place. The other mounts, they're not that bad. While you're under the car, it does help to have somebody moving the jack for you. So this job can be done by yourself, but it does help to have an extra set of hands doing it. So once you get that mount tightened back up, all you got to do is go back in, reverse of what you just did, get the box back installed, make sure all your wires are back in the correct location so they don't get burnt or anything from the motor or messed up, because those ECU wires right there are extremely important that you get them back so you don't have to worry about something going wrong with that harness. So you can see right here, all I'm doing now is getting those 3 bolts tightened back up to get the box back in place and get the battery put back in the car. So I'll probably just let some music play over this because it's pretty straightforward just putting the battery back in the car. But if you've made it to this point, you should be able to change out all your motor mounts very easily now and know exactly what you'll be looking for whenever you're doing it. Alright, so that's all I have for that video. Sorry it took me so long to get another video out. So me and my wife have been really busy. We just had a newborn baby boy, and I've had a lot of stuff going on the past month, so it's definitely taken me a while to get this video edited and uploaded to YouTube. But I will hopefully be getting a lot more videos coming out. But with that video should hopefully help you be able to change all your motor mounts out on any of those models, the 05, 06, and I want to say up to 08 Mazda 3. But just be sure to check and make sure that your vehicle is the same. But it is pretty straightforward. Just make sure you use jack stands when you're under your vehicle. And I hope that the video will make the job a lot easier for you. And again, like always, any tools and any of the parts that I use will be in links in the description down below for Amazon. So go ahead and check those out if you need to find the parts quickly and easily. And hopefully that'll help you out. But with that, if you liked the video, please hit the like button and hit the subscribe button because I will be coming out with a lot more content. And with that, thank you for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Alright, so I got the old mount off, and I want to show you exactly where this thing's starting to go bad. So the way this thing's built, down here at the bottom, it's a piece of metal with this rubber surrounding. And on this mount, see if you can hear it. You can hear it clunking in there. So basically what's happened is that metal has actually spread out just a little bit. And also if you zoom in right here, you can see right there where the rubber's getting cracked and it's deteriorating. So there's nothing between this metal clamp and the actual mount. So that's creating a lot of movement and a lot of noise as well. But you can also see right in here, if you can get into it, this crack right here between this upper piece of rubber and this bottom piece of rubber. So this mount is completely failing and it's starting to come apart. But that's where a lot of the extra motion is coming in from the motor moving. So when we compare it to the new one, you can see right here the rubber is nice and smooth, the metal's tight, you can barely move this thing, it doesn't make hardly any noise. And right here, I think this aftermarket one, if we can get them side by side maybe, it's kind of tough, but you can see right here the rubber is actually a little bit thicker than it is on the stock one. The stock one actually looks like 2 separate pieces of rubber where it's split, whereas this one looks like one solid cone shaped piece of rubber. So I'm hoping it'll be a little bit stiffer and it'll last a little bit longer than the stock one did. But we got this one off, so now we're going to get it back on the vehicle and I'll show you how to put it all back together. So if you look at this mount, this part isn't really all that bad. And I should have known the new mount actually did not come with this piece. So this is the piece that was mounted. It mounts just like this right up against the transmission. And then this hole is the bolt that actually holds it. Take a look at the rubber around that. So it's completely deteriorated. It's starting to actually come apart. I think the metal sleeve is actually separate from the mount, but you can see that thing is all tore up. So this is probably the worst mount on the vehicle. But of course, since it didn't have this piece, now I've got to run to O'Reilly's, see if I can find the piece to match that so I can put the new mount back together under the car. So we went to O'Reilly's. If you can't find this part online, we figured out that's because it's called a strut mount. I don't know why, it's bolts to the transmission, but that is a strut mount. Not to get confused with the struts that are behind the wheel, but this is a strut mount. So that's what we got. So right here you can see the difference again in the rubber. It's a lot thicker rubber here. The rubber comes all the way up to the end, whereas on the stock one you can see where it's got like a concave down in there where the rubber just started failing and coming apart. So I think all these new mounts, all the aftermarket ones, they look like they're built more solidly than they came from the factory, which is definitely going to be a good thing because it'll prevent everything from ripping right here. All right, so here's our transmission mount, the third and final mount on the vehicle. So if you look down in here, you can see where it's all cracked. The mount's actually coming apart from the side of it, and then up here, maybe it'll focus right there. You can see that crack right there where it's starting to come apart. And then all the way across it, it's all dry rotted and it looks pretty rough. This one I think though is probably the best of the three mounts that we took off. But here is all the old mounts that we had